An entire royal court was buried alive to serve their king for eternity. This is just one of the 28 startling rituals unearthed across the ancient Near East that we will uncover together. By the end, you will possess a new understanding of the human drive for meaning that shaped the very cradle of civilization. We will explore why prehistoric people plastered the skulls of their dead and what drove a culture to sacrifice its own children. These discoveries force us to ask a profound question about our own history. What does our deepest fear of the unknown reveal about who we are? This landscape of sun-baked earth and winding rivers was the birthplace of civilization itself. Here, along the fertile crescents of the Tigris and Euphrates, humanity first experimented with living in vast cities, under complex laws, and with gods who demanded everything. Societies like the Sumerians, who gave us the wheel and the first written word, and the Babylonians, with their towering ziggurats reaching for the heavens, saw the world as a fragile balance between the human and the divine. Their entire existence was woven into a cosmic tapestry where a failed harvest or a lost battle was not mere misfortune. It was a sign of divine displeasure, a tear in the fabric of reality that required a profound response. This is the essential context for the rituals we will uncover. They were not acts of random superstition but calculated, deeply symbolic procedures to maintain order in a universe that often felt chaotic and threatening. The very ground of the Near East has proven to be a remarkable time capsule. The dry climate has preserved objects you would never expect to survive millennia. Baskets that once held grain, wooden tools, and even the imprints of textiles in the mud have been found, offering an intimate portrait of daily life. Archaeologists focus their efforts on the region's distinctive tells, those massive, layered mounds that hide entire cities built one on top of the other over thousands of years. Peeling back each stratum is like turning the page of a history book, revealing the rise and fall of empires and the evolution of belief. It is from these ancient hills, from the dust of forgotten palaces and temples, that the evidence of these startling rituals has emerged, waiting to tell their stories. Now, with this world firmly in mind, our journey into the depths of ancient belief truly begins. Within the silent, sun-scorched earth of southern Iraq, the royal cemetery of Ur presented a mystery that would redefine our understanding of ancient devotion. Sir Leonard Woolley's team, digging in the 1920s, first uncovered simple graves, but as they dug deeper, they broke into a tomb that was anything but simple. It was the final resting place of a Sumerian queen named Puabi, and she was not alone. Laid to rest with her was her entire court. Soldiers stood at attention with their spears. Musicians held their lyres, servants and handmaidens, all adorned in elaborate golden headdresses and lapis lazuli jewelry, were arranged in perfect, peaceful rows. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of violence. Instead, the scene suggested a solemn ceremony, a final procession into the afterlife. The stunning conclusion was that these individuals had not been forced. They had voluntarily consumed a sedative or poison, choosing to follow their monarch into eternity. This practice is known as retainer sacrifice, and it speaks to a belief system where life after death was a tangible continuation of the world they knew. A queen would still need her attendants. A ruler would still require guards and entertainment. The archaeologist Dr. Jane McIntosh explains that for these retainers, this was not a death sentence but a profound honor. It was a guaranteed passage to a prestigious position in the next world, a final, ultimate act of loyalty that bound servant to master forever. This ritual forces us to look beyond our modern horror and see a culture where devotion was so powerful, so deeply woven into the fabric of reality, that it transcended death itself. The Great Death Pit, with its dozens of carefully arranged bodies, stands as one of archaeology's most dramatic and poignant discoveries. It reveals a world where the boundary between life and death was not a wall, but a doorway, and entire courts were willing to walk through it together. This profound belief in an afterlife that mirrored our own would find a different, and in some ways even more personal, expression in another ancient practice, one that involved carefully preserving the faces of the dead. While the royal court of made their journey together, another ancient community found a different way to keep their dead close. In the prehistoric settlement of Jericho, beneath the very layers that would later yield the famous biblical walls, archaeologists uncovered a practice that was both haunting and deeply personal. They found human skulls, but these were not merely bones. They had been transformed. Each skull was meticulously covered with plaster, carefully modeled to recreate the likeness of a human face. The artisans used seashells set into the empty sockets to serve as staring, lifelike eyes. This was the work of the so-called Skull Cult, a tradition that dates back over 9,000 years. These were not objects of fear, but of reverence. They are considered one of the earliest known forms of ancestor veneration. The skulls likely belonged to respected elders or community leaders. After death, their heads were preserved, plastered, and painted, then kept within homes or communal spaces. Imagine the presence of a founding ancestor, their likeness watching over the family hearth or the village gathering. Renowned archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon, who led the excavations at Jericho, saw this as clear evidence of a sophisticated spiritual belief. For these Neolithic people, the dead were not gone. They remained active participants in the life of the community, their wisdom and protection still sought by the living. The incredible care taken in this ritual speaks volumes. Mixing plaster and pigments to capture individual features, perhaps the curve of a nose or the set of a jaw, was an act of love and memory. These were sacred portraits, not trophies. They represent a powerful, intimate bond between generations, a desire to bridge the gap between the worlds of the living and the dead. This poignant ritual makes us wonder if the very first portraits ever created were not of the living, but of the dead, immortalized in plaster and memory. This intimate form of remembrance stands in stark contrast to a ritual born from a much darker, more desperate need for divine favor. The same desire to secure divine favor that guided the hands of Jericho's artisans found a more formal, state-sponsored expression in the royal city of Ebla. Deep beneath the doorways and foundational walls of its grand palace, archaeologists uncovered small, hidden treasures. These were not lost valuables, but deliberately placed caches known as foundation deposits. Each contained a powerful collection of objects, animal bones, precious stones like deep blue lapis lazuli, and small clay tablets inscribed with careful script. These deposits were the physical remnants of a vital consecration ritual, a ceremony performed to bless a new building and plead for divine protection for everyone who would live or work within its walls. The inscribed tablets often bore direct appeals to gods and goddesses, explicitly linking the structure's physical stability to the continued favor of the heavens. As Paolo Mattei, the lead excavator of Ebla, has stressed, these were not acts of simple superstition. They were a fundamental part of state religion and architecture, a necessary procedure to ensure the entire kingdom's prosperity and security. The specific choice of items speaks volumes. The sacrifice of a sheep or an ox represented a significant economic offering from a pastoral society, while the inclusion of semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli, which traveled from distant Afghanistan, demonstrated the kingdom's wealth and its far-reaching trade connections. Every element was chosen for both its material and symbolic value, a direct investment in a future blessed by the gods. This practice reveals a worldview where human construction was a sacred act. A palace was not just a building, it was a pact with the divine, its very foundations spiritually charged from the moment of its creation. The meticulous placement of these deposits shows a sophisticated belief that ritual could actively shape reality, bringing order and permanence to a human world that so often faced chaos. This careful ordering of the world through ceremony would be taken to a stunning extreme in another ritual, one that harnessed the raw power of fire and water. From the sacred foundations of Ebla, we journey to the rushing rivers of the Hittite Empire. For this powerful Anatolian civilization, water was not merely a resource, it was a divine witness and a cleansing force. Their capital at Hattusa has yielded clay tablets inscribed with meticulous instructions for river rituals, complex ceremonies of purification. Imagine a priest standing at the bank of a swift-flowing river, a small lamb or goat by his side. The entire community might be gathered, burdened by a collective sin, a transgression that had angered the gods and brought misfortune. The priest would perform a series of precise actions, transferring the spiritual stain of that sin onto the innocent animal. He might whisper the confession into its ear or lay hands upon it, symbolically loading it with the community's guilt. Then the animal was released into the current. As the river carried the creature away, vanishing around a bend, the Hittites believed it carried their impurities with it. The flowing water did not just wash the sin downstream, it utterly dissolved it, restoring moral and spiritual balance. Scholar Billy Jean Collins explains that these rituals were a formal part of Hittite law and religion, acting as a powerful form of communal therapy. When drought or plague struck, it was a sign of divine displeasure that required a collective cleansing. The river was personified, almost treated as a deity that could consume and transform human failings. This practice reveals a profound understanding of renewal, a belief that purity was a cycle, not a permanent state. The symbolic power of transferring sin onto a scapegoat is an idea that would resonate for millennia, appearing in various forms across later religious traditions. It shows a universal human yearning to be free from the weight of wrongdoing, to start anew with the help of the natural world. This communal quest for purity through symbolic acts stands in sharp contrast to a ritual that demanded the most personal and most final form of devotion imaginable. The sheer scale of devotion at Tel Brak is almost overwhelming. In a single temple, archaeologists unearthed not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of small, wide-eyed figures staring out from the dust of millennia. Carved from creamy white alabaster, these votive figurines were all deposited in a single sacred place dedicated to a deity scholars call the Eye Goddess. Each one was a silent prayer made solid, an individual plea for healing, for protection, or for the blessing of children. Their most striking feature is their enormous, piercing eyes, shaped like exaggerated coffee beans or almonds, which seem to hold your gaze across the centuries. These eyes were not merely a stylistic choice, they symbolized the all-seeing nature of the goddess herself, a divine witness who observed every hardship and heard every whispered request. The archaeologist Max Mallowan, who worked extensively at the site, recognized that this was evidence of a popular cult. Unlike the royal tombs of or the state rituals of Ebla, this was a form of worship accessible to everyday people. A common farmer or craftsperson could commission or make one of these simple idols and place it in the temple, directly engaging with the divine. This ritual personalizes ancient faith in a way few other discoveries can. Each small statue was a physical manifestation of hope, a point of contact between a human heart and a cosmic power. The accumulation of these offerings over centuries created a literal mountain of faith, a powerful archaeological record of countless personal struggles and dreams. This deeply personal form of devotion, where individuals sought a direct link to their god, stands in stark opposition to the next ritual we will uncover, a grand state-sponsored spectacle designed to showcase the absolute power of a king and his gods. The personal devotion of thousands at Tel Brak stands in stark contrast to the grand public spectacle orchestrated by the Babylonian state. For 12 days each year, the entire city of Babylon came to a standstill, consumed by the Akitu, or New Year festival. This was not merely a celebration, it was a complete reset of the cosmic and political order. At its heart was a dramatic journey for the chief god Marduk. His divine statue was taken from its inner sanctuary and paraded with great pomp to a special temple outside the city walls. This procession symbolized the god's temporary death, a period of chaos that the entire kingdom had to endure before his triumphant return and rebirth. The most startling part of the ritual involved the king himself. In a profound public ceremony, the monarch was stripped of his royal regalia, his scepter and crown taken away. The high priest then approached the humbled king and delivered a stinging slap across his face. This was not an act of random violence, but a deeply symbolic humiliation. The king was then forced to kneel before the statue of Marduk and make a detailed declaration of his innocence, swearing that he had not failed the city or neglected the gods throughout the past year. As the scholar Stephanie Daly explains, this entire ordeal reinforced a crucial idea that the king's power was not his own divine right, but a loan from the gods, subject to moral and spiritual scrutiny. Only after this confession of subservience was the king's royal insignia returned, his rule divinely approved and reinstated for another year. The festival also featured massive processions, public feasts, and the recital of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation that told of Marduk's victory over primordial chaos. This was more than a religious holiday, it was the fundamental mechanism for maintaining the kingdom's stability. By publicly validating the ruler's legitimacy, the Akitu bound every citizen, from the highest noble to the lowest laborer, to the health of the state and the favor of the gods. It was a breathtaking fusion of theology, politics, and theater, all performed to ensure the world would not fall into disarray. This public orchestration of power through ritual finds a much darker, more personal parallel in a practice that sent children into the earth itself. While the Babylonian king sought to control the future through public spectacle, other ancient people turned to a more shadowy source of knowledge, the dead themselves. On the island of Cyprus, within the Bronze Age city of Enkomi, archaeologists uncovered a deep, dark pit hidden inside a sanctuary. This was no ordinary trash heap. Scattered at its bottom were the burnt bones of young lambs, shattered pottery vessels, and the clear, sooty evidence of repeated fires. This pit is believed to have been a center for necromancy, a ritual portal for summoning the spirits of the departed to answer urgent questions about the future. The dead were not gone, they were simply in another realm, a place that held secrets the living desperately needed to know. Ancient texts from nearby Ugarit describe similar practices in vivid detail, speaking of offerings made to call upon ancestral spirits, of chants and invocations meant to pull wisdom from the silence of the grave. The scholar Annie Corbett explains that such rituals were not everyday magic. They were acts of last resort, typically performed in times of great crisis. When a king fell ill, when a harvest failed for years, or when an enemy army gathered on the horizon, the living would turn to this pit. A priest or a seeker would descend, making specific offerings to appease the chthonic powers, the gods of the underworld. The choice of a young lamb was deliberate, its purity and innocence serving as a powerful bargaining chip to open a line of communication with the other side. They believed that by giving life they could receive knowledge. The pit itself was a physical gateway, a liminal space where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead was thought to be at its thinnest. Imagine the scene, the flickering firelight casting long shadows on the pit's walls, the smell of burning meat and incense, the tense silence broken only by a whispered question into the darkness, waiting for an answer to echo back from eternity. This universal human yearning to know what lies ahead, to seek counsel from those who have already passed through the great mystery of death, connects us directly to these ancient people. Their necromancy pit is a powerful testament to a truth we still feel today, that the past is forever haunted by the future. This desperate search for answers from the spirit world reveals a profound anxiety, a fear of the unknown that could drive a society to seek guidance through even the most dramatic means. The goddess Ishtar's temples were centers of power where the sacred and the sensual intertwined. Ancient texts from Mesopotamia describe a practice that has long fascinated and confounded modern scholars, the ritual of temple prostitution. According to sources like the Greek historian Herodotus and various cuneiform tablets, women known as hierojules served in the temples of Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and fertility. Their service could involve engaging in sexual acts with strangers, not as a commercial transaction, but as a profound act of religious devotion. The renowned Assyriologist Gwendolyn Lake suggests this was likely a symbolic reenactment of the sacred marriage, the hieros gomos, between the goddess Ishtar and her divine consort, Dumuzi. This mythical union was believed to be the engine of the world's fertility. By ritually embodying the goddess, these women were not performing a profane act. They were participating in a ceremony meant to stimulate the land, to ensure bountiful harvests and the continued propagation of people and livestock. The women involved might have been dedicated priestesses or ordinary women fulfilling a temporary sacred vow, their actions viewed as a pious offering to a powerful deity. This ritual forces us to set aside our modern moral frameworks. In the world of ancient Mesopotamia, sexuality was not separate from the divine, it was a potent channel for it. The human body itself could become a medium for connecting with cosmic forces, a living instrument to maintain the balance of the natural world. This challenges our deepest assumptions about the boundaries between religion and physicality, inviting us to see these practices not through a lens of scandal, but through the lens of a culture that viewed all of life, including its most intimate acts, as part of a sacred whole. This complex role of women in ritual leads directly to another ceremony, one that reveals a starkly different dimension of female power and devotion in the ancient world. In the quiet corners of ancient homes and shrines, a different kind of offering was made, one that required no grand temple or royal decree. At sites like Tel Dan in the Levant, archaeologists have uncovered small, humble caches that speak to the most personal forms of devotion. Tucked inside pottery vessels or placed near altars, they found carefully deposited locks of human hair. These were votive offerings, intimate gifts presented to a deity. Often it was women who performed this ritual, shearing their long tresses as a profound sign of devotion, a gesture of deep mourning, or to mark a major life transition like marriage or the birth of a child. In the ancient world, hair was not merely a part of one's appearance. It was considered a potent symbol of personal identity, of strength, and of the very life force flowing through a person. To cut and offer, it was to give a piece of oneself, a sacrifice that carried immense spiritual weight. We see echoes of this practice in biblical texts, such as the Nazirite vow, where individuals dedicated themselves to God by allowing their hair to grow untouched before finally cutting and burning it as a sacred offering. The renowned archaeologist William Dever emphasizes that these fragile finds are precious because they provide tangible evidence of personal piety, a dimension of ancient life that so often vanishes from the material record. Sometimes these locks of hair were buried alongside other personal items, a simple piece of jewelry or a cherished amulet, amplifying the depth of the supplicant's commitment. This was not a ritual mandated by a king. It was a voluntary, heartfelt act, a direct line of communication between an individual and their god. The very fact that these delicate organic materials have survived, preserved for millennia by the dry, forgiving climate, offers us a rare and deeply moving connection to a single, anonymous person's hopes and fears. While kings built ziggurats and priests performed grand ceremonies, ordinary people were engaging in their own quiet rituals, using the very substance of their bodies to seek comfort, blessing, or simply to be heard. This intimate form of worship reveals a universal human need to feel connected to something greater, a need that could find expression in the simple, powerful act of letting go. The quiet offering of a lock of hair speaks of a personal, voluntary devotion, but in the sun-scorched Tophets of Carthage, we find a ritual of an entirely different magnitude. These sacred precincts, filled with row upon row of stone markers, hold within them small ceramic urns. Inside these urns are the charred bones of infants and young children, intermingled with the remains of lambs and young birds. For decades, archaeologists have debated the grim meaning of this discovery. The site's own inscriptions provide a chilling clue, referring to the offerings as a molk, a vow made to the supreme gods Baal-Hamon and his consort Taanach. Ancient Roman and Greek historians wrote with horror of the practice, describing a bronze statue of the god with outstretched arms, under which a fire was lit. They claimed that infants were placed into the idol's burning hands as the most profound sacrifice possible. Many scholars, like Sergio Ribicini, suggest a more compassionate interpretation, that these Tophets were simply special cemeteries for children who died of natural causes, their remains sanctified and offered to the gods posthumously. The presence of animal bones could support this, seen as symbolic substitutes, yet the sheer, staggering volume of remains, with some estimates reaching into the tens of thousands over centuries, tells a more disturbing story for others. The victims were frequently first-born sons, the most precious possession a family could give. This was not an act of random cruelty. It was a calculated, desperate measure believed to be necessary for the survival of the entire community. In times of war, plague, or famine, when the favor of the gods seemed utterly withdrawn, Carthaginian society turned to the ultimate pledge. By giving what was most dear, they hoped to appease divine wrath and secure a future for their city. To understand this is to peer into a world of unimaginable pressure, where a parent's love for their child was pitted against a perceived cosmic necessity. The emotional weight of this ritual is almost unbearable, forcing us to confront the terrifying logic of a belief system that could demand such a price. It reveals a stark truth about the ancient world, where devotion could be measured in the most heartbreaking of currencies. This dark exploration of sacrifice takes another turn, moving from the heat of the Tophet to the cool, dark depths of a sacred well, where another kind of offering was made not to secure the future, but to answer its most pressing questions. The logic of sacrifice found its most bizarre and cynical expression not in the desperation of parents, but in the cold calculations of the royal court. When the moon turned an ominous red in the Mesopotamian night sky, a celestial event interpreted as a direct prophecy of the king's death, the entire state machinery swung into a meticulously planned deception. To avert this divine decree, a substitute king was installed. This stand-in was often a condemned criminal, a man with a mental disability, or a simple gardener plucked from obscurity. For 100 days, this surrogate ruler would sit upon the throne, wearing the royal robes, eating the king's food, and performing the most mundane of royal duties. All the while, the true monarch lived in hiding, referred to only as the farmer to complete the celestial illusion. The entire kingdom participated in this elaborate charade, a collective performance designed to trick the gods into believing the omen had been fulfilled. As the esteemed historian Jean Botero elucidated, this ritual reveals a core Mesopotamian belief that destiny was not a fixed sentence but a force that could be manipulated through precise, symbolic action. When the 100 days concluded, the ruse reached its grim and inevitable climax. The substitute and a woman playing the role of his queen were ritually executed. Their deaths were not viewed as murder but as a profound, state-sanctioned sacrifice. They had absorbed the evil fate intended for the true king, and by carrying that threat to their graves, they ensured the kingdom's continued stability. This practice blurs every line we might draw between justice, religion, and raw political survival. It was a form of cosmic risk management where human life became a bargaining chip to maintain order. The substitute king ritual forces us to confront a world where identity itself could be a costume, and where the most powerful man in the kingdom could only preserve his life by convincing the heavens he was someone else entirely. This chilling manipulation of reality through role-playing finds a powerful echo in another ritual, one that used masks not to deceive the gods but to become them. The bull's raw power was a divine force made flesh, a truth celebrated far beyond the Near Eastern mainland on the island of Crete. Yet the unmistakable image of the bull leaper, captured on frescoes and seal stones, traveled across the sea. In the Egyptian delta city of Avaris, archaeologists uncovered fragments of Minoan-style wall paintings depicting this very spectacle, a startling find that proves the ritual's influence had penetrated the heart of another great civilization. In this breathtaking ceremony, young athletes, both men and women, faced a charging bull. Their goal was not to kill the beast but to use its own momentum. As the animal lowered its head, a leaper would grasp its horns, using the powerful thrust to somersault over its back, landing gracefully on their feet behind it. This was not a chaotic struggle, but a highly choreographed performance of supreme agility and courage. The renowned archaeologist Nano Marinatos sees this as far more than a sport. It was a sacred drama, a ritual where humanity confronted the untamed power of nature, embodied by the bull, and through skill and bravery, achieved a momentary victory. The bull itself was a potent symbol, often linked to storm gods across the ancient world, representing both creative fertility and destructive chaos. To engage with such a creature in this way was to engage directly with the divine. For the participants, this was likely a crucial rite of passage. Successfully vaulting the bull may have marked their transition into adulthood, proving their worth to the community and the gods. The sheer danger involved made every successful leap a collective relief and a cause for celebration, uniting the audience in a shared experience of awe. This ritual perfectly wove together sport, theater, and deep spirituality, creating a spectacle where the human body itself became an instrument of worship. Such a physical embodiment of belief stands in stark contrast to another ritual, one that moved from the vibrant, public arena into the silent, secret dark of a cave. The divine was not confined to grand temples or royal decrees, but lived within the very walls of the home. In the 10th century before the Common Era, in the Israelite city of Taanach, a family likely gathered around a remarkable object, a tiered terracotta cult stand that served as their personal altar. This intricate artifact, discovered by archaeologists, is a frozen moment of domestic worship. Each tier tells a part of a sacred story, featuring a nude female figure flanked by two lions with mythical cherubim, hybrid creatures with the bodies of lions and the heads of men standing guard. The nude figure is widely interpreted as a representation of the goddess Asherah, a powerful Canaanite deity of motherhood and fertility. Her presence in an Israelite home speaks volumes about the blending of beliefs in daily life. This was not a rejection of a state religion, but a practical, heartfelt incorporation of divine forces that govern the most immediate human concerns: the health of children, the success of the harvest, the continuation of the family line. The lions and cherubim were not mere decoration, they were divine protectors, their fearsome imagery creating a spiritual barrier around the home and the offerings placed upon the stand. Scholar Beth Alpert-Nack emphasizes that such stands were the centerpieces of household worship, where the head of the family, often a woman, would lead rituals to ensure the household's prosperity. Incense would have smoldered on its top, its fragrant smoke carrying prayers upward, while small offerings of grain, oil, or wine might have been placed on its ledges. This is where religion became personal, woven into the fabric of meals, chores, and the quiet moments of the evening. The Taanach stand is a powerful reminder that for most people, the most important rituals were not the public spectacles that defined kingdoms, but the private ceremonies that sustained families. This intimate connection between the household and the heavens finds a strange and powerful echo in another ritual, one that moved worship from the warmth of the home into the vast, silent expanse of the desert. The warmth of the household altar gave way to the boisterous, crowded halls of Ugarit, where the boundary between a party and a funeral completely dissolved. Here, a powerful social and religious guild known as the Marzeah gathered for a feast that was anything but ordinary. Cuneiform tablets from this coastal city describe an event of profound duality, a ritual banquet held in honor of the dead or a specific deity. Members would recline in a special hall, consuming vast quantities of wine and food, their voices rising in ecstatic celebration or descending into loud, ritualized mourning. This was not a somber affair, but a vibrant, multi-day event that fused obligation with revelry. The host would pour immense resources into the feast, a public display of wealth and piety that cemented his status within the group. According to researcher John L. McLaughlin, these gatherings were a cornerstone of community life, strengthening the bonds between the living while actively appeasing the ancestors who watched over them. The most poignant moment came with the libation, a deliberate pouring of wine onto the earth or into a special vessel reserved for the departed. In that act, the living and the dead shared a cup, the spiritual divide momentarily bridged by the simple, universal act of sharing a drink. This practice of commensality, of eating and drinking together, was far more than a social courtesy. It was a powerful ritual act that reinforced a shared identity and a collective memory, tying the present community to its past in the most tangible way. The Marzeah exemplifies a world where celebration and veneration were not opposites, but two sides of the same coin, where the dead were not ghosts to be feared, but honored guests at a perpetual banquet. This deep connection forged over food and drink reveals a fundamental truth, that some of the most powerful rituals are those that fill both the stomach and the soul. A simple pottery vessel can hold an entire worldview. In the ancient city of Lachish, a single ewer, a graceful pitcher for pouring liquids, carries an inscription that dedicates it to the goddess Elat. This was no ordinary piece of kitchenware. Crafted in the late Bronze Age, this vessel was a sacred instrument, designed specifically for the ritual of libation. Imagine a priest or perhaps the head of a household lifting this very ewer, tilting it carefully to pour out a stream of wine, oil, or pure water onto an altar or directly onto the earth. This was not a waste of precious resources. It was a profound act of communion, a way to seek divine blessings or to solemnly seal a sacred vow. The liquid flowing from the spout symbolized the desired flow of favor from the goddess herself, a tangible exchange between the human and the divine. The ewer's elegant shape and its formal inscription mark it as a valuable cultic object, likely used in a temple or a wealthy home. As archaeologist David Ussishkin points out, such vessels are found all across the Near East, showing just how fundamental liquid offerings were to countless religious traditions. What makes the libation so powerful is its beautiful simplicity. Unlike rituals that required a royal tomb or a grand spectacle, this was a spiritual act accessible to almost anyone. A farmer with a little surplus oil could make an offering. A family celebrating a birth could pour out a cup of water in thanks. This ritual transformed an everyday action, the simple act of pouring a drink, into a moment of deep spiritual significance. It connected the most mundane of objects and actions directly to the heavens, proving that the divine could be approached not only with grand sacrifices, but with the quiet, generous gesture of sharing what you have. This seamless blending of the ordinary and the sacred finds a dramatic counterpoint in a ritual where the object of worship was not a liquid offering, but a living, breathing king. While the household ewer connected a family to their goddess, another discovery revealed the desperate rituals of a man who spoke directly to the assembly of gods. In the fertile Jordan Valley, at a place called Deir Allah, archaeologists uncovered a scene of ancient panic preserved on plaster. Long strips of text written in black and red ink had fallen from a wall and shattered, but their message remained. Dated to the 8th century before the Common Era, these plaster inscriptions tell the story of the prophet Balaam, son of Beor. He is the very same Balaam known from the Bible, but here we have his story told from outside the biblical tradition. The texts describe a night of terror where Balaam is visited by the gods in a vision. They show him the divine council itself, the Shaddai gods, gathered to decree a terrible fate. The world is to be shrouded in darkness, a punishment for some unknown transgression. Balaam's response is not passive. He immediately assembles his people and begins a complex ritual to avert the coming disaster. The inscriptions describe a ceremony filled with weeping and fasting, a collective act of mourning and purification meant to appease the angry deities. They also hint at animal sacrifice, a powerful offering to bargain for mercy. As scholar Joanne Hackett emphasizes, this is not just a story, it is a manual for crisis. It shows a professional seer in action, a man trained in specific ceremonial protocols to interpret the most frightening omens and communicate directly with the divine realm. Balaam was not a lone mystic, he was a recognized ritual specialist, an intermediary hired in times of profound uncertainty. When the natural order seemed to collapse, when the sun itself was threatened with extinction, society turned to figures like him. He knew the correct words to say, the proper sacrifices to make, and the precise rituals to perform to calm the gods and pull the future back from the brink. The Deir Allah inscriptions give us a rare, first-hand look into the tools of the West Semitic prophet, a man who stood between humanity and the divine, trying to read the signs and plead for a second chance. This glimpse into the high-stakes world of professional divination leads us to a ritual that sought to control fate not with words, but with the deliberate, permanent power of a curse. The prophet Balaam sought to change fate with words and ritual, but for the people of the Negev desert, the most powerful rituals were silent, carved into clay. In the stark, arid landscape of the Chalcolithic period, they practiced a burial custom of profound patience and artistry. After the initial burial, they would wait. They waited for the flesh to decompose, for the body to return to its essential bones. Then, with great care, they would gather these skeletal remains and place them inside a special container, a clay ossuary. But this was no plain box. These ossuaries were crafted with stunning creativity, shaped like miniature houses with ridged roofs, or transformed into the forms of animals, their contours suggesting a protective spirit. Archaeologist Thomas Levy interprets these as vessels for an afterlife journey, a permanent, symbolic home for the spirit once its temporary earthly shell was gone. The intricate decorations tell their own story. Faces were sometimes modeled on the lids, with wide, stylized eyes and prominent noses, granting the deceased a perpetual presence. Geometric patterns, zigzags and chevrons were painted or incised onto the clay, turning each ossuary into a unique work of sacred art. This was a multi-stage funeral, a process that involved the entire community in a long, deliberate dance with death. The bones were not hidden away, but collected and stored together in communal charnel houses, creating a physical archive of ancestry. Can you envision the ceremony, the careful lifting of each bone, the respectful placement into a house-shaped vessel? This ritualized curation of remains allowed the living to maintain a tangible link to those who came before, actively managing the relationship between the generations. It was an early, powerful form of ancestor worship, where the dead were not gone and forgotten, but were kept close, their bones serving as a foundation for the community's social and spiritual identity. The quiet reverence etched into these clay houses reveals a world where death was not an end, but a transition that required a beautiful, permanent home. In the stark, windswept isolation of the Sinai Desert, a remote fortress known as Kuntalit Ajrud offered more than just shelter. Within its walls, weary travelers left behind a unique record of their faith, scratched and painted onto large storage jars called pithoi. These were not casual graffiti, but heartfelt invocations for safety. The inscriptions they left are startling, calling upon Yahweh, the God of Israel, for blessing, but they do so alongside a second figure, his Asherah. This pairing of the Israelite god with a Canaanite goddess of fertility reveals a world of popular religion far more fluid than official texts might suggest. Scholar William G. DeVere sees this as a clear case of syncretism, where everyday people blended divine powers from different traditions to build a stronger spiritual safety net. For a merchant facing a bandit-infested road or a soldier marching to a distant outpost, theological purity mattered less than practical, tangible protection. The rituals performed here were likely simple: a prayer whispered into the dry air, a small libation of precious water poured onto the earth, or the sacrifice of a scrap of food. The pithos itself became the permanent record of that transaction, a durable plea for divine favor left at a wayside shrine. This practice underscores a fundamental truth about ancient belief, that ritual was a portable tool for survival. The gods traveled with you, and their favor could be secured not just in grand temples, but at a lonely desert crossroads with a humble offering and a hopeful heart. This mobility of faith, carried in the hearts and on the jars of ordinary people, stands in stark contrast to a ritual of immense stationary power, one that sought to command the very earth beneath a king's feet. The royal palace at Ebla was a stage for a ceremony that forged a king. Detailed on clay tablets, the coronation ritual was a meticulously orchestrated performance designed to transform a mortal man into the divine representative on earth. Before the assembled eyes of the city's elite and its pantheon of gods, the candidate was anointed with precious oils, a sacred act that set him apart from all other people. He was then presented with the royal insignia, the scepter and crown that were not just symbols of power, but physical conduits of divine authority. The most profound moment, however, was the king's symbolic marriage to a goddess. This sacred union, a hieros gamos, was the ultimate source of his legitimacy. By ritually wedding a deity, the king was no longer merely a political leader. He became the consort of the divine, the earthly anchor for cosmic power. As the archaeologist Alfonso Archai explains, this was not mere pageantry. It was the essential mechanism for maintaining both political order and cosmic harmony within Ebla's sophisticated bureaucracy. The entire event was saturated with wealth and significance, from the gleaming gold and silver of the regalia to the finest textiles draped over the participants. Every element was chosen to project the state's immense power and the ceremony's unparalleled importance. This ritual demonstrates that kingship was not simply inherited, it was constructed through performance. The oaths, the feasts, the grand processions all worked together to create an authority that the population could see, hear, and believe in. The king became the sole mediator, the crucial link standing between humanity and the unpredictable gods, responsible for ensuring the rains fell and the harvests were plentiful. This Eblate template for divine kingship would echo for centuries, shaping the coronation rituals of empires that followed. It reveals a world where power was not just taken, but ritually bestowed, a fragile contract between the heavens and the earth sealed with oil and a sacred vow. This profound investment in royal legitimacy through ceremony finds a strange and unsettling parallel in a ritual that sought to protect that same king from a threat no army could defeat. For the Hittites, the passage of time was a sacred rhythm to be marked with ceremony. Each new moon brought the festival of the month, a meticulously planned state ritual that turned the lunar cycle into a divine appointment. Clay tablets recovered from the archives of Hattusa provide a stunningly detailed script for this recurring event, listing every prayer, every offering, and every participant with bureaucratic precision. The ceremonies were a grand collaboration involving the king, the queen, priests, and temple officials, all performing specific roles in a divine drama. The goal was to continually nourish the gods, to keep the intricate machinery of the cosmos running smoothly. As the scholar Gary Beckman notes, these were not optional celebrations, they were essential maintenance for the universe itself. The rituals began with purification, a symbolic cleansing of the sacred space and the participants. Then came the offerings, the tangible gifts to the divine. Animals, often sheep or oxen, were sacrificed, their life force given to sustain the deities. Special breads were baked in temple ovens, their shapes and ingredients prescribed by tradition, while fine beers and wines were poured out as libations. Each action was accompanied by the recitation of ancient prayers, a formal dialogue between the Hittite state and its pantheon. This was religion as a scheduled, recurring duty, a monthly renewal of the contract between heaven and earth. The entire process created a powerful social rhythm, a predictable pulse of communal activity that reinforced the kingdom's identity and cohesion. The festival wove the authority of the palace and the temple directly into the calendar, making the state an inseparable part of the natural order. This institutionalization of time shows a civilization attempting to impose ritual order on the relentless flow of days, creating pockets of sacred stability in a world full of uncertainty. The sheer volume of tablets dedicated to these instructions proves their foundational importance, revealing a culture that believed its very survival depended on getting the monthly ceremony exactly right. This deep need for cyclical renewal through state ritual finds a powerful contrast in a practice that was intensely personal, a ritual not of public order but of private, desperate hope. The royal archives of Mari held more than just administrative records, they contained the very voices of the gods. Amidst the thousands of clay tablets lining the palace shelves, a special category of text stood out, the prophecy reports. These documents recorded the exact words spoken by men and women who had entered profound trance states, delivering urgent messages directly from the divine realm to the king. A prophetess might be stirred into ecstasy by the rhythmic beat of a drum, her own consciousness receding as a deity spoke through her. A temple official, enveloped in the thick, fragrant smoke of burning incense, would deliver a warning or a promise, his words meticulously written down by a royal scribe who stood by, stylus in hand. These were not vague predictions. The messages were often startlingly specific, advising the king on matters of war, diplomacy, and internal governance. One famous report even details the god Dagon demanding that the king provide a missing cultic object to a particular temple. As the esteemed Assyriologist Abraham Malamat has shown, these ecstatic rituals were a vital channel for divine will, operating alongside more technical forms of divination like extispicy, the reading of animal entrails. While a priest could examine a sheep's liver for signs, a prophet could deliver a direct, unedited command. This practice reveals a world where the boundary between the human and the divine was porous, where a god's thoughts could flow directly into a mortal mind and shape the fate of a kingdom. The prophets and prophetesses were not outsiders. They were formally recognized intermediaries, often affiliated with major temples. Their altered states of consciousness were not seen as madness, but as a sacred skill, a temporary merging with the divine that granted access to hidden knowledge. This personal, experiential dimension of faith stands in stark contrast to the rigid, state-controlled rituals of the monthly festival. At Mari, religion was not just a scheduled duty, it was a living, breathing encounter. The very fact that these spontaneous utterances were so carefully archived shows just how much weight they carried. The king's most crucial political decisions could hinge on the ecstatic words of a single, trembling individual, a human vessel temporarily filled with the voice of a god. This belief in an accessible divinity, one that intervened directly in human affairs, opens a fascinating door into the ancient mind, a world where ritual could dissolve the self and invite the ultimate guest. Even the most ordinary drink could become a channel to the gods. At the Philistine city of Tel Qasile, archaeologists unearthed a collection of distinctive jugs that transformed our understanding of their daily rituals. These were no ordinary pitchers. Each one was equipped with a built-in internal strainer, a clever feature designed to filter out the grain husks and solid residues common in ancient beer. This was a tool for a refined, ceremonial brew. Beer was the lifeblood of the ancient Near East, a safe, nutritious beverage consumed by everyone from laborers to priests. But in these special vessels, its role shifted from mere sustenance to a sacred offering. The archaeologist True Dothan recognized that these strainer jugs were the centerpieces of ritual feasts, likely dedicated to their primary god, Dagon. Imagine a communal gathering, the air thick with the earthy, fermented scent of barley beer. As the liquid was poured through the strainer into individual cups, it was purified, made fit for both human consumption and divine favor. This act of sharing a specially prepared drink was a powerful assertion of identity. For the Philistines, a people often defined in the biblical texts by their conflicts with the Israelites, these beer rituals reinforced a unique cultural bond. The way they drank, the tools they used, and the god they toasted all set them apart. The ritual transformed a simple act of consumption into a declaration of who they were. It was a form of commensality, the practice of eating and drinking together, that strengthened social ties while honoring the divine. The careful filtration of the beer suggests they believed the gods, too, desired a refined offering, a beverage free from impurities. These humble jugs are a beautiful reminder that the sacred was not always found in grand temples or golden idols. Sometimes it was found in the shared cup, in the communal act of lifting a strainer jug and pouring out a drink that nourished both the body and the spirit of an entire people. For the people of Emar, time itself was a sacred architecture built in 7-year increments. In this ancient Syrian city, the most important ceremony was not an annual event, but a grand ritual that unfolded over an entire cycle of seasons, culminating in the Zakru festival. This was a profound renewal of the city's very reason for being, its covenant with the supreme god Dagon. The entire community, from the highest official to the most humble farmer, participated in a multi-day spectacle that mapped their faith directly onto the land they called home. The climax was a powerful procession where the statue of Dagon was carried in a solemn parade beyond the city walls. This was not a retreat, but a declaration. By moving the god through the countryside, the people of Emar were ritually affirming Dagon's authority over the entire territory, the fields that fed them, and the roads that connected them to the world. Scholar Daniel E. Fleming explains that this practice wove theology into the very geography, turning the landscape into a living sacred text. Every hill and path held meaning, sanctified by the footsteps of the god and his people. The festival was anchored by sacrifices and communal feasts, tangible acts of devotion that fed both the deity and the social bonds of the community. This was religion on a grand calendrical scale. The Zakru required long-term planning and collective memory, a shared understanding that their relationship with the divine was not a momentary plea but a lifelong, generation-spanning commitment. It shows us a civilization that saw time not as a linear march, but as a spiral of recurring sacred moments, each 7-year festival a chance to reset their spiritual contract and ensure the world remained in balance. This intricate dance between the urban center and the open country, between the immediate and the cyclical, finds a poignant contrast in a ritual that was intensely private, focused not on a city's destiny, but on a single family's most intimate farewell. The sheer spectacle of Chalcolithic faith was hidden for millennia in a remote desert cave, in the parched cliffs of the Judean desert, at a place called Nahul Mishma. A discovery was made that would dazzle the archaeological world. Tucked into a natural crevice and carefully wrapped in a mat, explorers found a hoard of over 400 copper objects, a secret treasure dating back more than 6,000 years. This was not a collection of simple tools or weapons. These were objects of breathtaking power and artistry. There were elaborate crowns, some designed with knobs and horns that reached for the heavens. There were heavy scepters and tall, intricate standards, all forged from copper using a sophisticated technique known as the lost wax method. This advanced metallurgy allowed artisans to create complex shapes, covering the objects with images of horned animals, enigmatic human faces, and swirling geometric patterns. These were not items for daily use. They were the sacred regalia of a priesthood, the props for public rituals on a grand scale. Imagine a seasonal festival, a time when the entire community gathered. A spiritual leader would have worn one of these magnificent crowns, its weight a tangible symbol of authority. He would have carried a scepter, its polished surface catching the sun, while bearers held aloft the towering standards, their designs telling a story of cosmic principles and powerful deities. The entire procession would have been a symphony of gleaming metal and solemn movement, a sensory experience designed to overwhelm and unify the community. The leading theory proposed by the discoverer Pesa Bar Adon is that this priceless collection was hidden in a moment of crisis. Priests, facing an imminent invasion or a violent uprising, would have gathered their most sacred objects and fled into the wilderness. Their goal was not to save wealth, but to preserve the very heart of their religious tradition, stashing it safely in a remote cave with the hope that one day, they or their descendants could return to continue their ceremonies. This act of preservation gives us a unique window into their ceremonial life. Each object was more than a symbol, it was a vessel. The metal itself was thought to be charged with spiritual power, a divine force made tangible through human craftsmanship. The intricate designs were not mere decoration, they were a sacred language. A horned animal might represent a god of strength and fertility, while a series of concentric circles could map the cycles of the sun and moon. In the hands of a priest, these objects became conduits, transforming a public gathering into a direct encounter with the divine. The Nahul Mishma Hoard reveals a truth that echoes through all the rituals we have explored, that humanity has always used the material world to reach for the immaterial, crafting objects of profound beauty to give shape to its deepest beliefs. The voices of the dead were not silent in the city of Ugarit. They were a council of elders waiting to be consulted. Ancient tablets from this coastal kingdom describe a powerful ceremony dedicated to the Rapiuma, the deified ancestors and heroic royal ghosts of the past. This was not a somber act of remembrance, it was an active summoning. The community would gather, likely at a sacred tomb or a dedicated shrine, to call upon these spirits, inviting them back into the world of the living to share their wisdom and lend their power. The ceremony was a multi-sensory experience designed to bridge the cosmic divide. The air would thicken with the scent of burning incense, a fragrant signal to attract the spirits. The rhythmic beat of drums and the movement of ritual dancers created an ecstatic atmosphere, thinning the veil between worlds so the ancestors could step through. Offerings of choice food and fine wine were laid out, not merely in honor of the dead, but for the dead to partake in. This shared meal was the ritual's heart, a moment of literal commensality where the living and the departed dined together, reaffirming their unbreakable bond. As scholar Nick Wyatt clarifies, the Rapiuma were far more than memories. They were considered powerful intermediaries, a kind of spiritual aristocracy who could speak directly to the high gods on behalf of their living descendants. A king performing this ritual was doing more than seeking advice. He was publicly anchoring his own authority in the legitimacy of a heroic lineage. By invoking a legendary founder, he demonstrated that his right to rule flowed through an unbroken chain of power stretching back to the very dawn of time. This practice ritualized memory itself, turning genealogy into a source of tangible strength. A family's history was not just a story, it was a living resource, a reservoir of wisdom and divine favor that could be tapped through correct ceremony. The past was not a foreign country, it was a silent partner in the present, its ghosts actively consulted to help navigate the uncertainties of the future. In this world, to honor your ancestors was to empower your own destiny. Across the Mediterranean, the vibrant art of Minoan Crete found a startling home on the banks of the Egyptian Nile. At Tel el-Daba, the capital of the Hyksos rulers, archaeologists led by Manfred Biotek unearthed thousands of painted plaster fragments that did not belong. Their swirling patterns, vivid blues, and dynamic figures were unmistakably Aegean. These were Minoan-style frescoes, and they depicted a world of ritual in motion. Scenes of bull leaping, where acrobats somersaulted over the backs of charging beasts, and grand processions of offering bearers were frozen in time on the walls of an Egyptian palace. This was not merely imported art, it was a deliberate adoption of foreign ceremonial iconography. The Hyksos, a Semitic-speaking people who ruled the Nile Delta, were not simply decorating their halls. They were using this powerful imagery to construct an aura of international prestige and divine connection. By surrounding themselves with the symbols of a distant and sophisticated civilization, the Hyksos elite were performing a ritual of power every time they walked through these rooms. The frescoes served as a permanent backdrop, suggesting that the rituals they depicted, or at least their symbolic essence, were being integrated into the local court life. This was cultural exchange as a strategic tool. The leaping bull, a potent symbol of nature's untamed force in Crete, was reinterpreted in Egypt as a demonstration of the ruler's ability to command even the most exotic and dangerous powers. The presence of these artworks reveals a world where ritual was not a closed, secret tradition, but a transferable language of authority. It shows us that the elites of the ancient Near East were keenly aware of each other, curating rituals and their representations like commodities in a vast, prehistoric network of diplomacy and status. The walls of Tel el-Dabba tell a story of a globalized Bronze Age, where the performance of power could be beautifully and deliberately borrowed from afar. Even the afterlife demanded a final meal. In the shadow of the great Tel at Beth Shean, archaeologists unearthed a collection of peculiar clay coffins that held a profound ritual of farewell. These were anthropoid coffins, their lids molded and sculpted into the serene, stylized faces of the dead, creating a permanent, silent portrait for eternity. Inside, along with the carefully placed bones of high-status individuals, perhaps Egyptian administrators or local Canaanite elites, lay the remains of a Last Supper. Animal bones and pottery vessels were arranged beside the deceased, clear evidence of a funerary meal. This was not a casual gesture. The food could have been left as a direct provision for the soul's journey, a practical supply for an afterlife that mirrored the needs of the living. Alternatively, the mourners themselves may have consumed the meal right there, a solemn feast shared in the presence of the departed to reaffirm the unbroken bonds of family and community. The renowned archaeologist Amihai Mazar interprets these coffins as a powerful symbol of cultural fusion. The very concept of a molded portrait lid points to Egyptian influence, while the practice of a final meal resonates with deep local Canaanite traditions. This was not a simple borrowing of customs, but a true hybridization, a blending of beliefs at the crossroads of empires. The ritual transforms death into an act of eternal hospitality. The deceased was not buried and forgotten, but treated as an honored guest embarking on a long voyage, sent off with the same care and provision one would offer a living dignitary. This careful provisioning reveals a very specific vision of the hereafter, one where the soul continued to require sustenance, comfort, and recognition. It makes the afterlife feel startlingly tangible, a realm just beyond a thin veil where a shared meal could still connect two worlds. The quiet dignity of the Beth Shean coffins shows us that for these ancient people, the greatest ritual was often the simplest, an act of feeding someone one last time, ensuring they would never be alone or hungry in the world to come. Deep within the Neolithic settlement of Basta, in what is now Jordan, the creation of beauty was a sacred act. Archaeologists uncovered not just scattered beads, but the evidence of an entire industry dedicated to their production. This was no simple craft workshop. The sheer scale, the exotic materials like vibrant turquoise and deep red carnelian, and the location of the finds all point to bead making as a deeply ritualized activity, likely performed by skilled specialists in a consecrated space. Each bead began as a raw piece of stone, often sourced from distant lands through vast trade networks. The very origin of the material added to its mystical value, a piece of the faraway and the exotic. The transformation of this rough stone into a perfect, polished sphere or disc was a meticulous process. Using a bow-driven drill with a tiny stone or copper tip, the artisan would patiently bore a hole through the center. This was not a mechanical task. It is easy to envision each rotation of the drill being accompanied by a whispered prayer or a chant, a spiritual charge being breathed into the object with every turn. The final polishing with fine sand would have brought out the stone's hidden luster, revealing the brilliant blue or red within, as if awakening its dormant spirit. Hans-Georg K. Jebel, who has studied the site extensively, suggests this was far more than an economic activity. It was a communal ritual that bound the society together, reinforcing social roles. The beadmakers held a revered position, acting as intermediaries who could transform earthly matter into vessels of divine power. The finished beads, often discovered in burials or hidden caches, were clearly amulets or offerings. A single carnelian bead placed in a grave was not mere decoration. It was a shield for the soul's journey, a protective charm against the unknown perils of the afterlife. They were likely central to rites of passage, perhaps gifted at a birth, a coming of age, or a marriage, their colors and materials carrying specific blessings for protection, health, or fertility. The Basta beads show us that for these early people, ritual was not always a separate ceremony. It could be woven directly into the act of creation itself. The careful hands of the craftsperson, the focused mind, and the spiritual intention were all part of the same continuous process. Technology, art, and religion were not yet separate domains, but different threads in the same sacred tapestry. And so, our journey through these 28 startling rituals comes to a close. From the royal tombs of to the bead-making floors of Basta, we have witnessed the incredible breadth of the human drive for meaning. These were not acts of random superstition. They were sophisticated, calculated responses to a mysterious and often frightening universe. They were attempts to control the uncontrollable, to speak to the silent, and to find order in the chaos of existence. Each ritual, whether a grand public spectacle or a quiet domestic offering, was a thread in the social and spiritual fabric that held these early civilizations together. They answered a profound human need for connection to the gods, to the ancestors, and to each other. They reveal a universal truth about our species. We are storytellers and meaning makers, and we have always used ritual as our primary language to articulate the questions that have no easy answers. These ancient practices force us to look at our own world with fresh eyes. What are the modern rituals we perform, the shared stories we tell, to navigate our own uncertainties? The echoes of these ancient ceremonies are all around us, reminding us that the search for meaning is the most human ritual of all. These 28 rituals, for all their startling diversity, are bound together by a few powerful, recurring themes. They reveal the fundamental anxieties and aspirations that shaped the ancient mind. At their core, these practices were a sophisticated toolkit for imposing order on a chaotic universe. The world was a place of unpredictable floods, sudden plagues, and invading armies, a realm where the gods could turn their favor in an instant. Ritual was the ancient answer to this uncertainty, a structured set of actions designed to create pockets of predictability and control. When a Hittite priest sent a sin-laden lamb down the river, he was cleansing his community according to a precise script. When the priests of Ebla sealed a foundation deposit, they were embedding divine order into the very stones of their palace. These were not random acts of superstition, but logical, repeatable procedures to maintain cosmic and social balance. Communication with the divine was another universal driver, a desperate need to open a line of dialogue with the powers that controlled fate. This communication took countless forms. The wide-eyed statues at Tel Brak were silent, perpetual prayers. The ecstatic prophecies at Mari were direct, urgent messages. The substitute king ritual was a breathtaking attempt to deceive the gods themselves. Whether through humble offerings of hair or the grand spectacle of the Akitu festival, the goal was the same: to bridge the gap between the human and the divine, to plead, to thank, or to bargain for survival. The rituals provided a formal language for this dialogue, a set of protocols that, if followed correctly, guaranteed a hearing. The management of death and the veneration of ancestors form another profound thread weaving through these discoveries. From the plastered skulls of Jericho to the royal retainer sacrifice at and the ancestor feasts at Ugarit, we see a consistent refusal to let death be a final separation. The dead were transformed into powerful allies, guardians, and advisors. They were fed, consulted, and honored, their presence woven into the daily life of the community. This was more than memory, it was an active relationship. The beautiful ossuaries of the Negev desert provided a permanent home for the spirit, while the Rapuma ceremony actively summoned ancestral wisdom into the present. In a world without modern medicine or security, the ancestors represented a timeless source of strength and stability, a link to a past that could guide the future. Finally, these rituals consistently served to reinforce social structures and cultural identity. The Babylonian king's public humiliation during the Akitu festival was a powerful reminder that his authority came from the gods. The Philistine beer feasts with their special strainer jugs reinforced a unique group identity. The creation of sacred objects, from the copper crowns of Nahul Mishma to the ritual beads of Basta, was not just an artistic pursuit. It was a process that created powerful symbols of shared belief, objects that could be used in public ceremonies to unite everyone under a common spiritual banner. Ritual defined who was in and who was out, who had power and who did not, creating a cohesive social order that was sanctioned by the heavens. The scholar Marzeah Iliade described this as the creation of sacred time and sacred space. A ritual, whether performed in a deep necromancy pit or on a brightly lit bull leaping court, carved out a moment and a place that was different from the ordinary world. It was a time when the rules of everyday life were suspended and the veil between worlds grew thin. The symbols used in these spaces, animals like bulls and lambs, elements like water and fire, artifacts like scepters and masks, were not arbitrary. They were a symbolic language. The bull represented untamed natural force. Water was purification and renewal. A crown was a conduit to divine authority. These symbols translated abstract, terrifying concepts like power, purity, and fertility into tangible forms that people could see, touch, and manipulate. Seeing these patterns allows us to look past the initial strangeness of these rituals and recognize their internal logic. They were not bizarre or random. They were coherent, intelligent systems for navigating the human condition. The pouring of a libation, an act so simple, addressed the universal need to give thanks. The care taken with the dead answered our deepest fear of oblivion. The desire for order, for communication, for community, these are not ancient concerns. They are human ones. The legacy of these rituals is all around us, in the structured ceremonies of our own religions, in the shared meals that mark our important life events, and in the quiet, personal ways we still seek to find meaning in an uncertain world. Our journey through these 28 rituals reveals a tapestry of human belief that is both deeply foreign and surprisingly familiar. Whether a community sent a lamb down a river to carry away its sins or a family placed a lock of hair in a shrine, each act was a profound expression of the same fundamental quest. They sought meaning in a mysterious world, security against unseen dangers, and connection to something greater than themselves. These ancient people were not so different from us. They loved their children, they feared the dark, they hoped for a better harvest, and they desperately sought answers in the face of life's greatest mysteries. The archaeologist Louis Binford once observed that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Yet, in these startling differences, we find powerful echoes of our own struggles and aspirations. The need for order, the comfort of community, the fear of the unknown, These are the threads that bind humanity across the millennia. We encourage you to reflect on how these ancient practices inform your own understanding of history and what it means to be human. If this exploration into the cradle of civilization has intrigued you, please subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of our past. We would love to hear which of these 28 rituals fascinated you the most in the comments below. Thank you for joining us in uncovering the secrets of the ancient Near